Order, please. Begin the daily routine presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to inform the House that the Voluntary Planning Board, a non-partisan citizen policy forum, has accepted government's request to conduct a public consultation and research initiative on off-highway vehicle use in the province. Mr. Speaker, this government is concerned about the rapid growth of the use of off-highway vehicles and particularly their impact on public safety and the environment. Since off-highway vehicles have become a part of so many people's lives in Nova Scotia, we feel it is important to go to the public to help us develop sound solutions on this complex issue. Mr. Speaker, the concerns surrounding off-highway vehicles are widespread, from the public and user safety to environmental damage to enforcement and others, Mr. Speaker. It is a very complex issue. Mr. Speaker, it is such a broad issue that affects almost every department in government in one way or another. And as a result, we will be providing voluntary planning with an interdepartmental resource committee to help them understand how this issue affects all the different government departments. We have asked voluntary planning to lead this consultation and research exercise in an effort to make recommendation to government on several issues. Some of these issues include recreation opportunities, legislative and regulatory changes, the role of public stewardship, trail development, insurance, enforcement, and education and training. I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that voluntary planning is beginning this project immediately, and a consultation schedule will be announced very shortly. I encourage all Nova Scotians to get involved in this process, especially those who have knowledge, experience, and interest in the issue of off-highway vehicle use. And we ask that those persons contact voluntary planning. We value their input. They can contact voluntary planning toll-free at 1-866-858-5850, or they can check out their website at www.ns.ca/VP. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that this is a worthwhile endeavour. It affects a great many departments, as I said in my remarks. But also, Mr. Speaker, we have to remember there's about 40,000 plus all-terrain vehicles on the roads, on the fields, and on the in the woods in this province. That's a lot of vehicles, Mr. Speaker, and certainly it is a way of life to many Nova Scotians in winter and summer to get out and enjoy the countryside on their ATV. We want them to be able to do it within certain limits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Halifax-Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am one of those Nova Scotians who has knowledge, experience, and interest in the issue of off-highway vehicle use. I think probably every member of this House will have both knowledge, interest, experience, and I would add concern about off-highway vehicle use. This is a subject which is long overdue for examination. I think it's probably been at least 2 years since members of our caucus raised the issue of concern over ATVs. The Minister is correct to draw our attention to the fact that there are so very many of these vehicles in our province. Probably many of us have had the experience, at the very least, of...
Order, please. Order, please. Now, member for Halifax-Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure many of us have had the experience of being on highways, including 100 series highways, and seeing users of ATVs at the side of the road and indeed crossing the road in what I think can only be described as a fairly dangerous manner. But it's not just in highways that one is able to see ATVs. Anyone who has hiked even in the remotest parts of the province will probably have been dismayed to find evidence of the presence of ATVs in remote areas. This includes not just unworn paths on existing paths or small dirt roads, but through the wilderness itself. And unfortunately, these vehicles do a lot of damage when they move around in the wilderness areas. We're, of course, very pleased that the issue is being looked at, but I think we can only say with some regret that it's about time. I wonder really if further study is necessary. It's not as if this issue only arose for the first time now. We've been aware of it in Nova Scotia for a long time. Other provinces have been aware of it for a long time. Indeed, at least two provinces, I think both Quebec and Newfoundland, have introduced legislation that is designed to regulate the use of off-highway vehicles. So it might have been possible to move without further delay. I'm also concerned that something wasn't included in the minister's statement, and this is the problem of what we do in the interim. While this matter is being studied, would it not have been possible to bring in interim controls? And I think particularly about our wilderness areas. This has been an active issue with the minister's department. He knows, I think, that many representatives of environmental organizations have been urging his department to act promptly for some time to deal with this issue. So what I'm concerned about is that if too much time goes on, more damage will be done. We're approaching the season at which these vehicles will be used a lot more. So what I'm suggesting to the minister is that he think about the possibility, if he's going to continue to study this matter, to think about the possibility of bringing in interim controls, certainly interim controls, and I would urge him very stringent controls in all of our parks and protected areas to make it clear that ATVs should not be there. Furthermore, this should be reinforced with clear postings at all entryways. So with that, Mr. Speaker, let me express my thanks to the Minister for having advised me in advance of his intention to make this statement today. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister as well for providing a copy of his statement in advance. I believe the Voluntary Planning Organization is a very worthy organization to have dwelled into this particular issue. It would have been nice to have some greater insights through the Minister's statement on what in fact the Department of Transportation and Public Works did in the last 4 years on this particular issue. It would have been nice to know what the Department of Natural Resources through the Minister's statement did on this issue over the last 4 years. It would have been nice to see what the Department of Environment and Labour did on this particular issue over the last 4 years. It's a very serious issue. There's one about safety. There's one about increasing concern about the number of deaths across not only Nova Scotia, but our sister provinces. There's the issue of liability. But there are also, too, Mr. Speaker, there's the issue of the rights of the individual ATV operators to be able to travel without considerable encumbrance, which through many of the regulatory processes that were put in through these protected spaces and through the Department of Environment and through the Department of Natural Resources that make it very difficult for good, well-intended and safe operating ATV operators and indeed the provincial body to enjoy this recreational sport. It's ironic, as the Minister was making a statement about worker safety today, out in the courtyard, we looked across the street on the fourth floor of the Johnson building, and we saw a worker on a scaffold with not all his safety equipment. So I guess the question and the point being, does the Minister always aware of what's going on around him? And that's the same with this particular issue. Putting it off to voluntary planning for a future day with some substantive results, that's great. But another deferred action plan is really a little disappointing. But I do thank the Minister for at least moving in that direction, and any effort ahead in a positive way is a good effort. Thank you.
Any further statements by ministers? Government notice of motion. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today at noon we join together on the grounds of Province House in a ceremony to honour those who have died as a result of a workplace accident or illness in this province, and whereas April the 28th is designated throughout Canada as a day of mourning for workers killed and injured on the job, and whereas there were 28 workers killed because of workplace accidents and illness in Nova Scotia in 2002, therefore be it resolved that the Department of Environment and Labour continue to work with our many partners and with employees and employers to create safe working environments and to reduce occupational injury and illness. And, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 1,000 Canadian workers die at work, 1 million more are injured, and thousands die from diseases caused by toxic substances in the workplace. And whereas April 28th, the National Day of Mourning, allows Nova Scotians to remember and mourn all those workers killed or injured at work. And whereas this day reminds us that we must be ever vigilant in strengthening and enforcing health and safety rules in the workplace, therefore be it resolved that this House, on this National Day of Mourning, recognize and mourn for the many Canadians who have died or been injured in the workplace and vow to make workplace health and safety a paramount concern. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today's budget vote marks the last budget vote for the member from Argyll as Finance Minister, and whereas after 4 years, $1 billion in additional revenues and $500 million worth of debt, the Premier still has to borrow more money than he is taking in. And whereas the current minister was also a member of 2 previous governments that racked up $1.1 billion deficit in 1993, a legacy of high unemployment, crumbling schools, and inadequate health care. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House recognize that the Minister of Finance missed a golden opportunity to make up for his past sins against the Nova Scotia people, and that instead of a legacy of stability, he is leaving a legacy of uncertainty and debt.
Notice table. The Honourable Premier, Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas HMCS Montreal steamed into Halifax Friday after completing the longest mission ever undertaken by a Canadian Navy ship, and whereas the 261 sailors and aircrew left for the Persian Gulf last September 9 as part of Canada's contribution to the war on terrorism, and whereas the frigate was the flagship for a naval task force of as many as 10 warships and boarded over 100 ships and hailed over 3,000 ships during its mission, therefore be it resolved that members of this legislature commend the crew of HMCS Montreal for the sacrifices they have made to protect our freedom and offer them a well-deserved Bravo Zulu. I request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rosemary Brown was a passionate advocate of human rights and equality, esteemed author, professor of women's studies, founding member of the Vancouver Status of Women's Council, and a recipient of the Order of Canada. And whereas she was the first black woman elected to political office in Canada in 1972 and later ran as a candidate for the federal leadership of the NDP in 1974. And whereas at the age of 72, Rosemary Brown died on Saturday, April 26th, of an apparent heart attack in Vancouver, British Columbia. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House pay tribute to Rosemary Brown, the tireless champion of social democracy, and extend sympathy to her brother Gus Wedderburn, residing in Halifax, and to the rest of her family. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas one of the few statements in the famous Tory Blue Book that has any validity is the statement made on page 37, which states that Nova Scotians are a compassionate people. And whereas the Blue Book continues with the statement that Nova Scotians believe that their government must work to enhance the quality of life for all people, including those who are mentally and physically challenged. And whereas this government's complete lack of interest and inaction on the current strike of Regional Residential Service Society is proof that the words of the government are just that, words. Therefore, it be resolved that this government be condemned for their lack of action in enhancing the quality of life for those who are physically and mentally challenged by allowing this strike to continue. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? Here and no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it has been an extremely successful year for the Blues Cap Curling Club, and whereas the Corey Boudreau Junior Rink won the right to represent Nova Scotia at the Canada Winter Games, and Yvonne Martin won her third Provincial Senior Women's Championship in 5 years, and whereas within hours of each other, Mr. Boudreau and Ms. Martin also won Provincial Men's and Ladies' Masters titles in Windsor and Middleton, respectively. Therefore, be it resolved, members of this House join me in congratulating the Blues Cap Curling Club on a very successful year and wish them many more successful years of curling in the future. I request waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Victorian Order of Nurses has a long, proud history of service in the homes and communities of Nova Scotia, and whereas the VON supports the Romano proposal to integrate properly funded home care under the Canada Health Act and make it a fundamental part of a modern healthcare system, and whereas until that proposal is realized, the VON will continue to raise scarce funds for its charitable programs through activities such as its Caring for Life Walk 2003 in communities across Nova Scotia on May 24 and 25. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the VON on their long and excellent service to Nova Scotians and wish them well with their Caring for Life 2003 fundraiser this coming May. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice in future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in June 1999, Premier Ham and the Tories stated that the $1.5 billion was enough money to run a quality system, a quality healthcare system in this province, if used properly. And whereas in 2002, the health budget for the province of Nova Scotia reached an all-time high of $2.1 billion. And whereas for this $2.1 billion expenditure, Nova Scotians have fewer nurses, longer wait times, canceled surgeries, and emergency room closures on a regular basis. Therefore, it be resolved that Premier Ham and his government be condemned for telling the people of Nova Scotia that he could manage the healthcare system for $1.5 billion when it's clear that they can't even do it with $2.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice.
Waiver here, no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas during the winter months it is often difficult for this province's rural students to have the opportunity to be active outside. I'll start again. Whereas during the winter months it is often difficult for this province's rural students to have the opportunity to be active outside because of limited access to outdoor activities within a reasonable distance. Whereas physical education teacher Tony Corbin and his students at River John Consolidated School have discovered a fun and simple winter activity, snowshoeing. And whereas the Program Development Assistance Fund, a partnership between the Nova Scotia Teachers Union and the Department of Education, has made this heart healthy activity possible by providing funds to purchase 35 pairs of snowshoes. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating the teacher, Tony Corbin, and his students for finding innovative ways to stay healthy and active year-round. Mr. Speaker, I request notice of motion.
Question waivers that agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas continued reductions in Canadian military has seen the closure of bases all over the country, and Nova Scotia has been no stranger to the cuts. And whereas as part of this reduction, this weekend marked the sad desecration and the closure of the Shannon Park Chapel. And whereas the chapel served the parishioners of Shannon Park area, both Catholic and Protestant, since its opening in 1957. Therefore, be it resolved that the House express its sincere regrets at the closure of the Shannon Park Chapel, and its sympathies goes out to all those parishioners who had to say goodbye to this beloved church. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Which waivers that agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas throughout Canada, in each and every year, the 28th day of April shall be known under the name of Day of Mourning for persons killed or injured in the workplace. And whereas 28 lives lost in Nova Scotia from workplace or workplace-related accidents. And whereas workplace health and safety is the business of every Nova Scotian, employers, employees, families, industry, and government. Therefore, be it resolved that we remember those workers who have been killed or injured in our workplace and begin the week with a renewed commitment to creating a safer, healthier Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Question waivers that agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ruth and Paul Colville came to Mosher's Corner more than 30 years ago with a dream of a better lifestyle and of farming the land organically. And whereas after 30 years of trial, sweat, and plain hard work, the Colvilles, along with the help of good farm workers, have established a growing market for their certified organic produce and meat. And whereas Cold Spring Farm is now successfully competing in the local market with California produce and is expanding the business into new markets with a new brand name. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Ruth and Paul Colville on making their dream farm a reality and wish them much success breaking into new markets with their new brand, Good Spring Organic. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice. Passage without debate.
Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Elsie and Alan McNeil of Upper Tantallon will celebrate 60 years of marriage. Whereas the McNeils are wonderful friends and neighbors to all in our community. Whereas this legendary couple have set examples of dedication and commitment for all of us to follow. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Elsie and Alan McNeil of Upper Tantallon on their 60th wedding anniversary with wishes of many more great years together. Ask for a waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question waivers that agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas environment debt continues to escalate along with their increasing financial debt because of the ever-amounting broken promises by this Premier. Whereas on page 32 of the Tory Blue Book, it promises to establish, after thorough consultation with Nova Scotians, an environmental green plan for Nova Scotia. And whereas, as of today, the people of Nova Scotia are still awaiting the Premier's green plan 4 years later, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that the Premier's track record undoubtedly shows his lack of concern for future generations by allowing the fiscal debt to grow and by ignoring the growing environmental debt.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the We Care Society recently held a telethon at the Glasgow Amphitheatre, exceeding their goal by raising over $40,000. And whereas the 6-hour telethon featured dozens of entertainers playing a variety of music to audience members and viewers watching the broadcast on Eastlink television. And whereas individual donations were up this year, showing the great generosity of the citizens of Pictou County. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the members of the We Care Society on the success of their telethon and thank all those who donated to this very worthy cause. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Agreed. Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Leo McKay Jr. of Truro, his novel 26 has, within a week of its release, vaulted to number 6 on the Maclean's bestseller list. Whereas his novel is inspired on the tragic Westray disaster in Stellarton and explores the tragedy of losing a loved one in a mining disaster. Whereas Cape Breton writer Alistair MacLeod says, and I quote, "The novel is about memory, loss, guilt, and the light of redemption, sometimes but not always before it is too late. Leo McKay Jr. has a clear, distinctive voice which needs to be heard," unquote. Therefore, be it resolved, this House congratulate Truro's Leo McKay Jr. on the success of his novel, 26, and look forward to his continuing success as a Canadian writer. And I seek waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 28th to May 2nd is Education Week, and whereas we should encourage all members from our community to support public education, and whereas with the support of parents, teachers, trustees, support staff, administrators, and members of advisory committees, we can raise awareness and support for an adequately funded education system. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House show their support for this year's Education Week, encourage our constituents to be active in our educational system. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today's Belgian horse is a big, powerful fellow that retains the drafty middle, a deep, strong foot, a lot of bone, the heavy muscling and amiable disposition, besides being a superb worker and a great wagon horse. And whereas Nova Scotia can be proud of the number of championship Belgian horses that exist in this province, and whereas the Nova Scotia Belgian Draft Horse Association and their various members with their teams of horses attend numerous agricultural exhibitions, Santa Claus parades, and other events around Nova Scotia annually, therefore be it resolved that all MLAs congratulate President Brenton Heffler and the Nova Scotia Belgian Draft Horse Association for their community spirit and always wanting to show these beautiful draft horses anywhere they can. And I would ask for waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ware's store has been a fixture in Eastern Passage for over 60 years, having been opened at Quigley's Corner in 1942. Whereas Kathleen K. Noggle has operated the store for several decades, first with her husband George Ware, and after his passing on her own, and later with her husband Mort Noggle. Whereas Ware's store, which has been in the heart of the community and close to the hearts of its residents for generations, is closing for good on April 30th, 2003. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Mort and Kay Noggle, operators of Ware's store, on their upcoming retirement, recognize their many years of service to their business and the community of Eastern Passage, and wish them all the best in the years to come. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 28, 2000, the Premier said, quote, "We have to stop piling up debt before it's too late. We have to start living within our means and stop mortgaging our children and grandchildren. Otherwise, we're going to end up financially and morally bankrupt," end quote. Whereas the Premier went on further to say, quote, "As government, we only have a couple of revenue sources. the taxpayers of today, that's you, and the taxpayers of tomorrow, that would be your children and grandchildren. End quote. And whereas in the same speech the Premier said, quote, we don't think it's fair to borrow the money and in effect spend more of your children's or grandchildren's income, end quote. Therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognise that the Premier is willing to borrow against his grandchildren's future in a last-ditch effort to remain Premier of Nova Scotia instead of doing the right thing and maintaining his personal integrity.
Nose is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Premier Ham's opening statement in the Blue Books states that political leaders must see government as a responsibility and an opportunity to serve their province. And whereas to date, this government has failed women and children by threatening services offered by women's centres and transition houses, reduced provincial contributions to social housing programs, and abandoned the physically and mentally challenged in the HRM. And whereas the measure of any society is how we treat the most vulnerable among us, therefore it be resolved that this Tory government be condemned for their actions when it comes to community services and be reminded that they have a responsibility to all Nova Scotians, not just their chosen few. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice table. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism is an example of altruistic acts on behalf of others that make it perhaps the highest expression of public service. And whereas the province of Nova Scotia recognizes communities based on their level of volunteerism and the annual Model Volunteer Community Award, with the annual Model Volunteer Community Award. And whereas on March 23, 2003, the municipality of East Hants was presented with the 2003 Model Volunteer Community Award. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the municipality of East Hants on receiving the 2003 Model Volunteer Community Award and all its volunteer residents for their shining example of selfless public service. Mr. Speaker, request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice in future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June the 17th, 1999, the then leader of the third party, now Premier, stated that, and I quote, I have dedicated my life to the provision of quality health care in this province. And whereas in that same speech, it was stated that I believe, quote, I believe that health care must be the #1 priority of government, unquote. And whereas the legacy of this Tory government when it comes to health care is fewer nurses, longer wait times, cancelled surgeries, increased pharmacare premiums and co-pays, increased ambulance fees, and emergency room closures on a regular basis. Therefore, be it resolved that Premier Ham reevaluate his vision for a quality health care system and admit that health care was never a priority of this government. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a waiver of notice.
There are several noes. Noes is tabled. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the National Volunteer Week is celebrated this year in Canada from April the 27th to May the 3rd, and whereas this is a time to honor the many people who volunteer their time and energy into enriching the lives of their fellow citizens and communities, and whereas the Canadian volunteer and nonprofit sector consists of more than 180,000 organizations and 6.5 million volunteers. Therefore, be it resolved that this House honor and congratulate the thousands of volunteers and nonprofit organizations and the millions of volunteers who give so much and so readily to make our lives much richer and fuller. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas earlier this year the government released Nova Scotia's student assessment results, and whereas this government announced our junior high school math scores were an appalling 32% and our elementary math students scored 42%, and whereas the Tory government's Learning for Life plan is a hollow, empty plan conjured up by the previous minister to appear as though she had done something during her time as Education Minister. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that this government has failed to invest in our children over the last 4 years, as evident in the recent assessment results.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax Shabukdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be seeking waiver. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this evening, Shar Shalom Synagogue will hold a Holocaust Eve ceremony to mark April 29th, Holocaust Day, or Yom HaShoah, a day of great pain and remembrance for the Jewish people. And whereas this day invokes remembrance of the Holocaust, the most fearsome tragedy to have befallen the Jewish people in its long history, in which 6 million Jews, fully 1/3 of European Jewry, including 1.5 million children, were murdered. And whereas this ceremony reminds us all that the degree of evil exhibited in the Holocaust may have no equal in all of human history, therefore be it resolved that this House join with the congregation of Shar Shalom Synagogue to observe Holocaust Day and mourn the 6 million Jews who died in Europe between 1930 and 1945. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the people of Manitoba were treated to a so-called tax cut by the provincial NDP last week, just like here in Nova Scotia. Whereas despite all the hoopla, the NDP in Manitoba and the Tories in Nova Scotia are merely giving a one-time tax loan because of the stealth tax measure known as bracket creep. Whereas bracket creep has been defined by the Manitoba branch of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as, quote, akin to legalized theft, and the provincial government has made off like bandits, end quote. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize that the Tory tax scheme is nothing but a loan that will be clawed back because of bracket creep, leading to higher taxes and not lower taxes, as has been said in the Tory propaganda.
Notice tabled. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in Lunenburg and Queens counties, youth at risk have a greater chance to achieve their potential and to make a successful transition to independent living. And whereas Empire House, a 6-bed facility for youth aged 16 to 21 who are homeless or at risk of being homeless, is now operating in Bridgewater under the Family and Children's Services of Lunenburg County. And whereas the support from the Department of Community Services, along with HRDC and the Family and Children's Services of Lunenburg County, young people now have a hand up as they are enrolled in an academic program and learning to become contributing members of the community. Therefore, be resolved that the members of the House applaud the opening of Empire House and acknowledge the youth who live there as they work to overcome obstacles and to get the grounding they need for happy futures. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Elizabeth Fry Society works with and on behalf of women involved with the justice system, particularly women in conflict with the law, and whereas each year the Elizabeth Fry Society honors women for their community work through their Rebels with a Cause awards, and whereas the awards will be given on May the 9th this year, and the honorees will be Yvonne Atwell, community development activist, Carrie Boudreau, social worker and community development worker, Darlene Jameson, lawyer, Sister Dorothy Moore, education consultant, and Lorna Pendleton, leader for community change. Therefore, be it resolved that this House commend Yvonne Atwell, Carrie Boudreau, Darlene Johnson, Sister Dorothy Moore, and Lorna Pendleton on being this year's recipients of the Rebels with a Cause Awards for the Elizabeth Fry Society. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move that you now leave the chair and the House resolve in the committee of the whole House on supply.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a bit of time to actually reflect on the life of Rosemary Brown, who earlier today, the leader of my party, introduced a resolution paying tribute and expressing our condolences to Rosemary's family. In that resolution, the member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, I think, laid out quite well the attributes and the accomplishments in Rosemary Brown's life. But one of the things that was neglected in that resolution that I'd like the record to reflect is that Rosemary Brown was a social worker, Mr. Speaker. And Rosemary Brown, in fact, taught at the Maritime School of Social Work at Dalhousie in the early 70s. And I was privileged to be in her class as a 22-year-old student. And I can say without any hesitation, Mr. Speaker, that it's unlikely that I would be here today in this legislature representing the community of Halifax-Needham if I had not met this remarkable woman, remarkable social worker, remarkable teacher, remarkable Canadian. Mr. Speaker, in 1984, when I ran for electoral office for the first time, I was very privileged to have Rosemary come to my nomination meeting and be my guest speaker at that meeting. And I remember well that warm summer evening at Veith House in August. There are many lessons that I have taken away from my association with Rosemary Brown, and I don't think there's any greater lesson that I've learned, Mr. Speaker, than the fact that if you, as a social worker, want to address issues of poverty and inequality, you need to look for the solutions in the ways that government behave to protect the privileged and the wealthy. That's the lesson I learned from Rosemary Brown, that poverty, in fact, is not the fault of those who live in poverty, but the responsibility for maintaining poverty in our society rests quite often with the rich and the powerful. Mr. Speaker, I can remember so well many of the lessons in our social work courses, where we spent a great deal of time looking at and analyzing and trying to understand the failures of our economic system to provide enough employment at a living wage for so many people whose only desire was to be able to support themselves in the labor force. And one of the things that certainly Rosemary Brown was very big on was talking about understanding our economic system and understanding the fact that markets do often fail, particularly in a society where there are boom and bust cycles, Mr. Speaker, and when you have the downturn in the economy is when, in fact, people are thrown out of the labor market through no fault of their own. And this was a lesson that certainly was learned in the Depression years. And those years, of course, Mr. Speaker, were the years when we built a social safety net in the country, because people were able to make the connections that the incredible economic failure that was occurring throughout the industrialized world was not the fault of individuals who could not get employment, but in fact it represented a very stark failure in the economic system. Rosemary also was an amazing feminist, and she had a very amazing passion to help people understand that women in our society are often left poor and disadvantaged because our society heaps on them the expectations to be responsible for the care of others without any compensation, without wages, without pensions. And therefore, the vast majority of people who would be poor in their senior years, in particular, Mr. Speaker, would be women, for whom there weren't adequate public protections in the pension system. And as well, often getting into the labor market was very difficult for women when they were placed in a situation of having to find accessible and affordable and dependable and high-quality childcare for their children. And she certainly brought to her work and the practice of social work, the teaching of social work, the work on public policy, a very strong analysis that suggested that governments needed to pay more attention to the position of women in our communities, and the fact that if we continually ask women to be responsible for the care of others, that we have to ensure that they don't have to pay the price for that by being poor in their old age because they weren't in the labor market contributing to a pension plan, et cetera, Mr. Speaker. Another thing about another issue for which Rosemary Brown was a passionate advocate, of course, was the issue of race and racism in our society. As a person of color, as a black woman, she had experienced many barriers, and she was a strong advocate to tear down barriers that saw people of color marginalized, segregated, discriminated against, and facing attitudes of prejudice for no other reason than their ethnic origins or the color of their skin. And the impact that she made on people who, both from communities that experienced racism, but for people like myself from the Caucasian community, to believe in the importance of integration and providing a more equitable opportunities and life chances as widely as possible to everybody in our society, and to reduce and eliminate inequality wherever we can was just so important. And I think this probably formed a key body of Rosemary Brown's work. And Mr. Speaker, as someone who represents a constituency with a very large African Nova Scotian community, I can only thank Rosemary Brown for opening my eyes to these issues. And I think without having had the experience as a young person in the education system at the university level, if I had never met Rosemary Brown, if I had not been taught by somebody like her who raised these issues and presented them so clearly, so passionately, so forcefully, and with the information that supported her arguments, I doubt very much that I would feel and understand these issues in the way that I do today. She made an incredible impact on me, and I know on others, as a human rights activist and as someone who believes fundamentally in the importance of human rights. And finally, Mr. Speaker, Rosemary Brown was an immigrant to this country. She came here from Jamaica, and she often talked about carrying a triple kind of oppression and having to deal with being female, being black, and being an immigrant. And she spent a great deal of her life trying to improve the public policy for newcomers and immigrants to this country, but she also had a profound commitment to people in the developing world. Rosemary Brown, I believe, was the first executive director of an organization called Match, which was an organization that raised money here in Canada to support women's organizations doing community and economic development in developing world countries. And she traveled this country relentlessly, talking about the position of women in the developing world, encouraging men and women in this country to commit some financial resources to assist people in developing countries, start worker co-ops, community health centers, transition houses and shelters for women who were abused and beaten in their own homes. And I think that the work of that organization, and certainly as well working for peace, working for peace and international awareness and understanding, is a legacy of Rosemary Brown. Mr. Speaker, I think I was, like many other people who knew Rosemary, quite shocked to learn of her death, an untimely death, Mr. Speaker, of a woman who has mentored and has taught, has certainly encouraged, and has been a groundbreaker in so many areas. And I know that certainly for women in my party, the New Democratic Party, we have in our hearts a very special place for this extraordinary woman who has always had time for the younger members of our party, for new people coming into the party like myself, and her sense of what was right and wrong and being able to behave in a principled way, never forgetting the responsibility that we have to act for the interests of people who are often voiceless in the political process, I think is the lesson that I will take away from this extraordinary life. So, Mr. Speaker, I really wanted an opportunity to stand here today in my place and pay tribute to the life of this wonderful woman. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly want to congratulate the member from Halifax Needham. I, like many members in this House, did not know Rosemary Brown, but I'm sure she'd be quite honoured at the very kind comments provided by the member from Halifax Needham today, and I certainly congratulate her for that. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity. As you know, today is going to be an important day in Nova Scotia, where we are going to have the vote on the budget, and I wanted to take this opportunity not only as a finance critic for our party, but also as the MLA for Richmond to make some observations about the budgetary process we've just gone through and what this budget will mean to Nova Scotians. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, having been home on the weekend in Richmond County, there is no shortage of opinions as to what people have to say about this budget. And I can assure you, which I'm sure is being reflected in the polling numbers that this government's receiving, is that they're not very favourable or complimentary, to say the least. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians and people of Richmond County alike see exactly through this budget and see through this rebate check as nothing but a cynical attempt to buy votes from Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, what's ironic is, as someone commented before, the old days of the rum bottle, well, at least when the Tories came with the rum bottle before, it was the Tories paying for it. Now they're coming with a check, and guess who's paying for it? It is us, the taxpayers, and it's the people of Nova Scotia in general. That's one of the things that they find most appalling. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to make a bit of a summary of some of the items that we've discovered as a result of this budgetary process. Let me go first to the Department of Health. Here we had a minister who in 1999 underwent what I would describe as the most cynical, crass campaign that I've ever seen in my time of following politics here in this province, where a politician at the time said, "A vote for me means a vote for me to put people out of work, and in return for that, I will open up hospital beds for you. What we saw during the estimates, it took a number of questions to get the minister to admit that she had actually not opened any hospital beds. She refused to answer it, but what we did find out is not only did she not open up any beds, not only did she not maintain the status quo of the beds that there was in 1999, because she changed her story later and said, no, I didn't mean I'd open up new beds. I meant I'd keep open the beds there was in 1999. Well, we found out that wasn't true either, because in fact, under this government, we have 179 less hospital beds than we had in 1999. And I'd be curious to see if the new Minister of Transportation could tell us how many new nursing home beds that we have under his government. Because I remember when he sat over here, he would continually go after the member from Dartmouth East and say, we need more nursing home beds, more nursing home beds. Lift the moratorium, more nursing home beds. I would challenge him to tell us now, Mr. Speaker, 4 years having been in Cabinet, how many nursing home beds have been opened under his government? Very simple answer, none. Yet they had all the answers when they sat over here, Mr. Speaker. I also, the Minister of Health, when the minister was asked, have you, and I should retreat a bit, the Premier in 1999 made a fundamental promise. He said, vote for me, I am a family doctor, I have the answers to health care, I don't need any more money, we can run health care on $1.5 billion. A vote for me means that I will fix the health care system. Now, when I asked the Minister of Health, okay, 4 years, have you fixed the healthcare system? You know what her answer was? We have stabilized the healthcare system. When I asked, did you fix it? She'd come back and say, well, we have stabilized it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've looked throughout the Blue Book. I don't see the word stabilize, but I see the word fix. Have they done that? No, they haven't, and the minister admitted that herself by saying now, oh, we've stabilized, we've brought some funding, and the word fix has disappeared because they haven't fixed it. Nova Scotians know that. People of Richmond County know it well. Under this government, the emergency room at the Straight Richmond Hospital remained closed longer than it remained opened. That is the legacy this government has left. Then, Mr. Speaker, people of Richmond County especially were saying, well, now the minister, the member from Halifax Citadel, when she was in education, it was a treat to see what blunder would happen week in, week out. And they said, well, in health, we're just waiting, and lo and behold, here comes SARS. Minister gets up, tells everyone, don't go to Toronto, and by the end of the evening, telling everyone, no, feel free to go to Toronto. Speaker, I would say, depending on if the election's not too soon, more to come from that minister, more to come. What have we seen in education? In education, we have seen, first, from the disasters from the previous minister, then we get a new minister, the MLA for Antigonish. Immediately, the people in the Strait Regional School Board said, well, now we have a Minister of Education who's from our board. And let's look at the Blue Book. What does it say? It says that we will bring in a plan to deal with boards that have high decreases in enrollment to ensure that there is not a negative impact on the classroom. Okay, that's in their Blue Book. I didn't say it, Mr. Speaker. They said it. 4 years later, when I asked the minister, where's your plan? Well, he said, we don't have a plan. Then I asked him, well, okay, the Strait Regional School Board is going to lose over 300 students again this year. They will need to eliminate 16 teaching positions. Will you guarantee that the funding will be in place to make sure these teaching positions are not cut? What does the Minister of Education, MLA for Antigonish, say? No, I will not make that commitment. Once again, another broken promise. Then, reading through the Blue Book, Mr. Speaker, and again, this is not my words, these are the words of this government. I read through it, and it says that there's going to be tax relief for graduating students to help them to defer that towards their student loan payments. So I asked the minister, where is that plan? Are you ready to go with it? What does he say? The Minister of Finance told me, bad idea, we're not going ahead with it. So there's another broken promise. Then I asked him, well, under your Blue Book, under education, post-secondary education, it says that you'll have a plan for university employment so that students going to university can work, try to pay down some of their debt and make some money. I asked the minister, where's the status of that plan? Nothing. Haven't done anything in 4 years. Well, I said, okay, so that's 2 or 3. Let's try another one. It says again in the Blue Book that they will have a program in place for graduating students to assist them with job search and place them in the proper employment. Asked the minister again, can you tell us what is the status of that promise? Once again, we have done nothing in 4 years on that promise. So another broken promise.
Order, please. The member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that they listen to the amount of broken promises that Nova Scotians will remind them when they get to the doorstep, so they can keep a running count of that. And maybe Mr. Bathurson or others will give them answers like he gives to the Premier to recite to Nova Scotians. I'm curious if it'll work well on the doorstep. Let's go to the Department of Environment. I asked the Minister, long-time Minister here, you've had 4 years, how many protected spaces have you added since you've been Minister at your government in 4 years? What's his answer? None. I said, okay. Well, we already had protected spaces. Our government, when it was there, had done a significant amount of work in establishing protected spaces, had been recognized by different environmental groups with awards and commended for it. So I said, well, what about management plans for these protected spaces? Have you done anything on the management plans? 4 years later, what was the answer from the Minister? None. No management plan, and no work has been done on it. Another broken promise. Then, Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, we arrived to the Department of Finance. Here, Mr. Speaker, what interesting revelations that we have had. At first, Mr. Speaker, the Tory spin doctors continued to put out the word that the check, the $155 check, was being sent out because Revenue Canada hadn't been given enough notice to implement a tax break. That was the unofficial word. It was the word being given by senior staff in finance in a budget lockup. And then, lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, we find out...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Finance on the point of order.
Speaker, the member opposite has stated that the senior staff has said that it's being done for because of the fact that the check is being sent because of the fact that we couldn't make the changes. That is not the case. The member opposite has said that before in the House. I have corrected him in the past, and I'll continue to correct him in the future.
Thank you. It's not a point of order, but it's clarification of facts. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister will continue in his stance, I will continue in mine as stating that that is clearly what was told to us. Yet the Tories have been spinning back ever since and saying, look, we know that the gig is up. They've went out and they've done some research. Because what did we find out from Revenue Canada? Well, no, they said they could have changed the tax rate July 1st. They had lots of time. In fact, the Minister tabled his budget April 3rd. He had up till April 15th, and they said they could have waited another week or two after that. We could have worked with them. Yet, it was a strategic decision made by the Tory party not to give a tax cut on July 1st. Decision was made to send out the check. The big question is, Mr. Speaker, who made that decision? Was it senior staff in the Department of Finance? Was it Tory strategists outside? That's a question I hope the Minister will answer for us as to whose idea was it. Because you can look in the Blue Book, and again, it never talks about mailing out a check to Nova Scotians. It talks about a cut, yet they made the decision to send out a check. So maybe the Minister of Finance will be able to clarify that for us as to who is behind the idea of mailing out this check. Mr. Speaker, this is again a government on page 1, and this is the Premier. You know, many people said, oh, John Hamm is integrity and everything, it's rock solid, and any word he said, he's kept. Mr. Speaker, how we have been able to lift the veil on that this session. On page 1, that the Premier has all of a sudden forgot, or he's torn out of his Blue Book, where he says, I believe in a government must live within its means. Mr. Speaker, after 4 years, this government has clearly proven that it was unable to live within its means. Not only has it been unable to live within its means, it has gone out and has continued to borrow money year in, year out. In it, the Premier says, I will not mortgage the future of my grandchildren. Then he stands here in this House and defends having added $500 million to the debt and says next year I will borrow another $118 million. But will it end there? No. The Minister of Finance said, I've borrowed, I'm borrowing today, and we'll continue to borrow tomorrow with no end in sight. What have we seen, though? We have seen that within a few years, the yearly cost for servicing the debt of this province will reach $1 billion. And yet the Minister of Finance would have us believe that his budget and his government's administration of these finances has been manageable. Now, Mr. Speaker, I challenge the Tories to go out on the doorsteps and tell Nova Scotians, do not worry that we're going to take $1 billion to give to banks that won't stay here in this province. We feel that is manageable, and we're proud of that. I challenge them to make that statement, because we'll certainly be reminding Nova Scotians of the fact of what this government has done. But keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, they had $1 billion in additional revenue from when they entered government in 1999. An extra $1 billion. Yet the Premier likes to talk about the economy in 1993. And rather than taking account for his 4 years in government, he talks about the previous administration in 1993, 1994. Now, Mr. Speaker, all Nova Scotians know you cannot compare today's economy and the growth we've seen in this economy with what there was 10 years ago. Yet, why does he do that? Because that is an act of desperation from a premier that knows that the fundamental promises that he's made to Nova Scotians are unraveling every day. They no longer say they're going to fix health care, they use the word stabilize. They no longer say they're going to live within their means, they say they're going to try to manage the finances. Bit by bit, Mr. Speaker, we've been able to lift the veil on this government so that Nova Scotians can truly see. One has to ask, were they naive when they set out in 1999? On a few points, maybe they were. My contention would be these statements were intentionally made for the purpose of garnering votes from Nova Scotians on promises they knew they had no reasonable ability to be able to succeed. So now, rather than admit that they have failed, rather than admit to say, well, no, we were unsuccessful in doing that, what we get now is more spin doctors. We saw that in the plan that was brought forward, that we obtained a leaked copy from government where senior departments were brought in, senior officials. And it wasn't, the message wasn't, look at our success and we need to go out and inform Nova Scotians of our success. That wasn't the message. The message was we need to convince Nova Scotians that we've been able to deal with the debt. We need to convince them we've been able to work on health care. We need to convince them that we've been a good government. Mr. Speaker, what Nova Scotians are saying is that provide us with good government through your actions and we'll pass judgment on that. There's no need for spin doctors. Bring us more medical doctors. We can certainly use them in Richmond County, where under this government we have continually had shortages of physicians. Not only at the Strait Richmond, in the communities of Lardouez, and in the communities of Louisdale-Ilmadam area. Yet, more spin doctors is the order of the day from this government, because on the eve of an election, rather than admit defeat, rather than admit failure, it is an attempt to use taxpayers' money through ads, through TV advertisements, through radio spots, and through the hiring of more communications personnel to try to convince Nova Scotians they've had good government, when Nova Scotians clearly know that the actions of this administration prove to them that they have had wasted opportunities, lost opportunities, and at the end of the day, a government that its legacy will be of adding more debt. And again, the message Nova Scotians say today when it comes to Tory governments, very simple. I've trusted too many to my sorrow, so pay today, not tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Good. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to talk a little bit about the fine riding of the Eastern Shore. As you all know and heard me speak often of it, it starts at the west side at the Lawrencetown Porters Lake and continues down to Ecum-Secum. A long, long way, Mr. Speaker. A very different type of riding. It has a sort of a type of suburban approach on one end and a very rural approach on the other. But, Mr. Speaker, what I have to talk about today is more or less on a positive note and how the Conservative government are making positive steps in the riding that I represent. But before I touch on that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to talk a little bit about what's taken place over the last year down on the Eastern Shore in relation to redistribution. Mr. Speaker, being the municipal representative for the area of Ship Harbour to Ecum-Secum, and pardon me? You still do some. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much, fine colleague to my right. Mr. Speaker, a change has taken place. Because of the realignments of the boundary, the Eastern Shore has lost a fine part of the riding, a very large geographical part of the riding, from Ship Harbour to Ecum-Secum. And I'm very sad, I would like to say, Mr. Speaker, to lose those wonderful constituents of mine. Those constituents played an important part in my political career, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, since being representative of that of the Progressive Conservative government, I must say that we have made a difference in the lives of the people from Ship Harbour to Ecum-Secum. And I first would have to talk about the announcement over a year ago about the $17.2 million that was allocated for highways down there. We stood in Sheet Harbour last year with the Premier, the Minister of Highways, and the Minister of Tourism, and we made an announcement with my colleague from Guysborough down in Sheet Harbour stating that this government was going to invest $17.2 million in the highway system, Musquodoboit East. Well, Mr. Speaker, it was a great day. There was a lot of celebration. But you know what happened, Mr. Speaker? Shortly after that, a couple of the constituents come up and they said, Bill, that would probably be just a promise. And I said, I think it's more than a promise because I have been involved in consultation and in planning with the government for a long, long time. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you today, it has been more than a promise. First of all, the bridge in Musquodoboit Harbour has been revamped and will allow now a heavy B-train trucks to travel across. Pavement out of this $17.2 million has been put out for tender in the Lake Charlotte area. We have paved 10 kilometers between Spry Bay and Sheet Harbour. Lately, a tender has just been put out, Mr. Speaker, 15 kilometers Ecum East in the member from Guysborough. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, these are more than promises. This is a positive step. This will promote opportunities for tourism and economic growth for that community. That right there tells you, Mr. Speaker, that this government believes in the rural parts of Nova Scotia. This government has made a difference in the Eastern Shore riding, and this government has not forgotten the people in that part of the rural riding. Mr. Speaker, we also could talk about many other issues. We could talk about the Ship Harbour Long Lake issue. I know that is an issue that's very sensitive to my colleagues across the way, and they know, Mr. Speaker, they know the work that I've completed in protecting and fighting the Department of not Economic Development, but Department of Natural Resources and the Environment to maintain some protection in that area. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, I feel good. Even though I'm leaving that part of the area, I'm not going to forget that part of the area. I'm going to work in concert with the member from Guysborough when he's elected, the member in the Sheet Harbour, Guysborough area, and when he carries the views to this government of the good people of Sheet Harbour and area. Mr. Speaker, we could talk about protected areas. I just heard about protected areas. Yes, it was the Liberal government that brought in the bill to protect these areas, and we appreciate that. But, Mr. Speaker, it's more than that. We have to create a balance. If you're either against the ATV users or for the ATV's users, we have to create a balance. And Mr. Speaker, the member from Cumberland South has played a big part in this, and my colleague to the right, Colchester Musquodoboit, and myself, we have met with government officials, we have talked to community groups, and we have asked them to create and to find a balance so that all people, all constituents, all people of Nova Scotia can use and enjoy these protected areas.
People, yes,
thank you.
all people.
And it isn't about I guess, looking at one group's interests and saying, okay, we're going to support that group. It's about creating that very important balance that makes us Nova Scotians and that we enjoy together. Talk about the, Mr. Speaker, as I stand here, my colleague to the right, he keeps talking about it. I don't know if he has a question for me today, but if he has one, I would ask him to stand and ask the question. But Mr. Speaker, he's standing. Yeah.
All member from Colchester Musquodoboit Valley, a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member extended an invitation to me to ask him a question and never one to decline, especially to an honourable colleague from the Eastern Shore. I would just ask the honourable member if he would sum up his views on this newfound position that the NDP has relative to the Federal Firearms Act.
The honourable member for the Eastern Shore.
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Tell us what you're talking about.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't really want to talk about that today, but I will, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to answer his question. As this House knows, that we've traveled to Ottawa a number of weeks ago and met with Mr. Easter, Solicitor General, who has just recently received a portfolio. We did talk about the long gun or long arm registry. Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that the position of this government, I was there with the Attorney General and the member from Cumberland South, we were there, and in opposition of the long arm registration. And what we had asked them at that particular time was to put a moratorium on this for Atlantic Canada until the government, the federal government, has had an opportunity to review and to understand the mistake they've made with this long arm registration. In saying that, we also asked them not only for the moratorium on that, but we asked them to decriminalize the code. And that would encourage people, if worse come to worse, that they could register. But the question asked, what do I think about the NDP stand on this gun registry? Well, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, they've taken a different stand than the Conservative caucus. Their stand simply they have asked the federal government for them to prosecute to prosecute violators of the Act.
Yes.
And it's our stand on this side of the House for no one to be prosecuted. So there is a difference there. And it's one of these stories, Mr. Speaker. It's one of these.
Order, please. Member Cole Harbour from passage on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this is important to put on the record as a point of order. It was your bill when you were in opposition, Mr. Speaker, with regard to the registry of the firearms, and our party at that point made our position quite clear. Gun control, yes. Gun registry, no, and that has always been our position.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
On a point of order, but certainly a clarification of the facts. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Are you for long arms, or are you against the Act, or are you for the Act? Are you for protected areas, or are you against protected areas?
Right.
Are you for the refund?
Are.
Are you for the $155 check given back by this government, or are you against the $155 check given to this government? Mr. Speaker, we hear our opposition talk about that, and I'm telling you, the government has made a decision, and this government has made a decision they're going to stand by. Because I've asked my constituents of the rural area, and I said, are you happy with the $155 check? Well, a guy said, Bill, I have to tell you, the $155 check we welcome, and next year it's going to double, and we have two people in our house that are earning income, which will approximately be $600. That will be an insurance payment. That will be a barrel of oil. That will help our household, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you this, and you know what he said to me? Don't really worry about the $155 check. This year, the government did not increase provincial income tax, and that is a benefit to all Nova Scotians. So actually, maybe with the work that we're doing, some Nova Scotians would think that we were going to increase the provincial income tax, but instead we've cut back 10%. And I'll tell you, most rural people that are making a living in rural areas appreciate the rebate or the cut in income tax. And there's no question about that. This is not a political issue. This is dollars. These are dollars in people's hands in the rural area. Now, you know that. My colleague's over there smiling. He represents a rural area. You either have $600 more in your household account or you do not have $600 more in your household account. It's whoever interprets how this is going to turn out. Now, I know, well, 300, 600, it's however you want to interpret it. Suppose it would be 900 if you had that many people. They all contribute. But, Mr. Speaker, I've really meant to talk about today about the good constituents of the Eastern Shore from Musquodoboit, Jador, East because of the redistribution, what's taking place. But I'll tell you what. I will wander across now and talk about the people that live in the Eastern Shore riding after this election. Now, the people would be from Lawrencetown, Porter's Lake, now down to, yes, that's up Ross Road, down into to the Newcomb's Brook area. These people will benefit, there's no doubt, by this new realignment, because their MLA has a very short area now to represent. Totally different than what has been historic in the past. And I'll tell you, there are differences taking place already in this riding. The pavement is taking on. The surveys are out. People are seeing a difference in the riding. Yes, pavement that has been shortcoming in the past. Of course, I've made the Eastern Shore my home. I was born there and brought up. And in my short life, I've never really seen major paving projects. It always was, well, there will be some given to the Eastern Shore if there's a little bit of time left out. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, there's a difference in the Eastern Shore.
There's one of your
People
constituents. Look,
are
there's one of your
proud.
constituents over there.
Yes, a constituent over there smiling at me. People are alive. People are alive. People are well in the Eastern Shore riding. People are positive people. We don't have the cloud that hangs over some people that speak in this House. People are looking towards positive movements from this government. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is important to have an progressive government ruling and watching over and partaking in government in Nova Scotia. This government is making a difference. This government is making a difference in the lives of Nova Scotians.
And they either are, Mr. Speaker, or they are not. Well, I can tell you they are making a difference. We are making a difference as a government. We are making a difference in the lives of the people of Nova Scotia. When we look at bridges being built, Mr. Speaker, I could talk about bridges. I could talk about bridges all day here. I was involved in a bridge in Chesuncook in which I had quite a struggle, but I want to tell you, this government stood beside me. That Canterbury Bridge is online and will be replaced in May the 30th. I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, so many good things to talk about this afternoon. We have pavement, we have prosperity, we have the RIM program, new signs, new ditches, new schools. Well, that's quite an interesting thing. I know that this government believes in education. I know this government understands the needs of the people of the Eastern Shore. I understand that we have some of the smartest children, some of the smartest young people, not only in Nova Scotia, but in Canada, living on the Eastern Shore. And I know this government will meet their needs so that they can face the future as they meet the world's needs, for sure. And I believe all good things come to those who wait, Mr. Speaker. Only you have to be appropriate. You have to be appropriate. When you're a representative of a fine group of people, Mr. Speaker, you just can't run off the mouth. You just can't go around spitting out this and that and stuff. You have to do your research. You have to understand what's in place. You have to understand how the system works. But the first thing you have to always understand as a representative, that you must be for your people and with your people. Mr. Speaker, I know that...
Please, the member for Cole Harbour, Mr. Passage. On point of order. Member for Cole Harbour, Mr. Passage.
Thank you. I was wondering if the member, Mr. Speaker, can explain to us whether a school that was on the Halifax Regional School Board's list, the school in Jador, I believe, that was supposed to be built, is still on the list for this government to be built in the next year.
Obviously, that's not a point of order. It's a question of the honourable member for Eastern Passage. Eastern Shore, I'd like to answer it. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
I've been in this House a long time. That member understands the protocol of this House. That member said in their estimates. That member said in estimates and listened to the Minister of Education talk about this. And Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be appropriate. I'll stand here and say it. I won't hide away from it, Mr. Speaker. The people of the Eastern Shore that know that they have a representative that knows education is important, that the children are important, and I want to tell you, they know their representative is doing their work in this seat, in this House here right now, and they know when the time's appropriate, positive news will come to the people of Eastern Shore. And that member, I thank him for the question. I hope I've answered it. Listen, Mr. Speaker, education, roads, hospitals. I can talk about hospitals. I hear about that. Our hospitals on the Eastern Shore, two of them, Mr. Speaker, are both stable. And I'll tell you, they have the community support, and they have the support of this member, and they have the support of this government. Our hospitals are doing well, and we thank you for the people that work there, Mr. Speaker. So we talk about hospitals and education and highways. Mr. Speaker, we talk about the economy growing.
Thank you. The member's time has expired. The motion is carried.
I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call the estimates of the Minister of Finance?
Passing my glasses back behind. Get a mic, please. Who's first over here? Graham Steele from Halifax Fairfield. We'll recognize is the minister ready and the staff? Thank you. Recognize the honourable member from Halifax Fairview. The supply will end at 4:30.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I wonder if we could start by your informing me how many minutes I have left.
59 minutes.
I personally don't have 59 minutes.
From yours, it's 29 minutes, member.
29 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, when we left off the other day, we were on the issue of pension valuation, which in my estimation is going to be the first big, sharp shock that is going to be faced by the new finance minister, whoever that is after the next election. The our current Minister of Finance has so far declined to give this House any information about the revised valuations of the Public Service Superannuation Fund and the Teachers' Pension Fund both of which have a significant impact on the province's financial state. Now, when we left off the other day, I had mentioned to the minister that his government this year revised the way that it was valuing pensions. And I suggested to him that he had done so for sort of baldly political purposes, that it was just after the last election when they changed the method from what it was to a new system in order to make the last government look as bad as possible. And this year, when the results would have made this government, put this government in a bad light, they decided to change the method back again. And so in a rather long-winded answer that ended up the last day, the minister explained why the new system was so much superior to the old system, which of course would make anybody wonder why they had switched it back in the first place. But the answer, of course, is because at that time it had a political purpose as well, which was to make the last government look as bad as possible. Now, what I had asked the minister and what he had danced around was this issue of what would the valuation have been if they had not changed the pension valuation method. What impact would it have had on the books? And the minister, if I can cut a long-winded 5-minute answer down to its essence, the minister said, well, they'd have to rehire the actuary and do that estimate. Although I have to say I don't actually quite believe the minister. And what I would suggest happened is that they did a rough run at what the numbers were going to look like this year, and the old method made them look so bad that they immediately decided to ditch it and adopt a new method. So I would suggest to the minister that although he might not know exactly to the penny what the new valuation is, that he and his staff have a very good idea of the ballpark that it's in. So I'm going to give the minister a chance to answer the question again now that he's had a few days to think about it. And I'm going to ask him again, roughly, what would have been the impact on this year's financial statements if the method of pension valuation had not been changed?
Thank you, member, for that question. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this question was asked on Friday. I indicated to the member opposite that we did make some changes to how we account for our pensions. And I should point out, Mr. Chairman, as we moved into the new accounting for the province, which is generally accepted accounting principles, that we've done a lot of work in a very short period of time. And a lot of the things that we endeavored to report under the new rules, Mr. Chairman, was actually quite a few issues. One of which, of course, is the valuation of our pensions. The other thing that we talked about changing was how we account for the assets that we buy under now we call them tangible capital assets, whereby we buy assets, we also depreciate them over the useful life. That is a change from the previous administration. And just for the members' edification, and I think that we've had quite a bit of debate on this in the last few weeks, especially for the member from Cape Breton West, defending the Liberals' position to do P3 schools. And one of the reasons that they were doing so, Mr. Chairman, was the fact that under their accounting, they were making literally hundreds of millions of dollars of purchases, and saying that these weren't capital assets, that they were leased assets, and as such they were keeping it off their income statement or off their statements. And so basically, I guess in a sense you could say out of sight, out of mind, and allowed them to make a lot of commitments prior to the last election in many of their ridings. Now, Mr. Chairman, I mentioned before that those are two of the major changes that we have made. The controller of our department is Kevin Malloy. He's assisted by Suzanne Wild, and they've done an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time. And I could say, with the limited resources that we do have, that they've done wonderful work. And if I keep bragging them up, they're up in the gallery, Mr. Speaker. They'll be looking for a raise. I should tell them up front, there's no raises coming, just platitudes. Other than that, you're not going to get any money. But I want to say, in regards of the pensions, that we have made some refinements to it, and as we move forward, I would anticipate that oftentimes we'll make adjustments in other types of accounting that we have. I should point out that under generally accepted accounting principles, the changes that we have made are permitted within that. We did take a look at how our pensions are doing, and I indicated on Friday, Mr. Chairman, that our pensions are no different than most other provinces, that they have lost value. And the fact of the matter is, every pension plan in, let alone Canada, but probably North America, has lost value. Now, the member opposite has asked for a specific amount of how much they have lost and how much of a change it would have how much of a change it would be in this income statement. I told them at that on Friday that for me to answer that question, we would have to basically go out and incur expense to do it. And I told them at that time I was not prepared to spend taxpayers' money to answer a question in the House as to what the difference would be. I also indicated at that time to them that the number would have been significant. It wasn't a small amount. However, the fact of the matter is I don't know the number, and that's what I stated on Friday. And here we are on Monday after I thought about it for a few days, and I'm still giving the same answer. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that answer, and I want to welcome all our guests in the gallery today. Member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next time the minister decides he's not going to answer one of my questions, maybe you could just stand up and say so, and then we could move on to the next topic. Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I've learned about generally accepted accounting principles is there's still a great deal of wiggle room, and the pension valuation thing is a perfect example of that. There's two methods, both of which are acceptable in accounting terms, but the choices of which one you adopt is well, in this context, a very political choice. And 4 years ago, they made one choice for political reasons, and today they're making another choice for political reasons, and it's all within the warm embrace of GAP. Well, here's another choice, Mr. Speaker. I've tabled this document before. It's a meeting of some of the most senior people in government, and it concerns the provision for doubtful accounts. It's attended by, among other people, Gordon Gillis, the Deputy Minister to the Premier, and Ron Lesbrons, Senior Deputy Minister, Vicky Harnish from Treasury and Policy Board, Moira McLeod, Treasury and Policy Board. And the minutes of the meeting indicate that all of those people at the meeting were clearly aware that the provision for doubtful accounts item in the budget was insufficient. It did not reflect the reality on the ground. So I wonder if the minister would care to explain why, within generally accepted accounting principles, senior governmental officials knew what the truth was, and that minister reported a different number in his budget.
Thank you, member, for that question. I'll direct that to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the member opposite has stated that I've reflected a different number in the budget. Mr. Chairman, each department prepares its budget and provides for allowances for debts that they may provides for losses of valuation of their accounts in their year. Now, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that this government has tried as much as possible is to work on an industrial expansion, I guess in a sense mostly on the performance-based types of initiatives. And I can use examples for the member opposite, especially a lot of the so-called call centers that we have done, Mr. Chairman, and there's many examples of those. In Cape Breton, there was one announced in Truro. There's some in my riding, our riding, my county of Yarmouth, and I could go on and on. I know there are some in Port Hawkesbury. There's some in New Glasgow, and I think there's some in a lot of them in the city. The member for Dartmouth is here, and I'm sure a lot of people that reside for Dartmouth North. I'm sure many people that live in your riding. Actually, it's in your writing, if I remember correctly, actually work there. That's two. He's correcting me. Thank you very much for that information. And so we've moved as much as possible to performance-based. Now, what that means, Mr. Chairman, is that they don't get the money unless they perform. Now, in the past, what we've done, and there's a good example of that was debated in this House last week by the member from Hants East, and I think it was it Arida? What is it? Arenda was an example of the previous Liberal government giving, I'm not sure if it's $7 or $9 million to a company to set up a factory to produce, I believe it's jet engines, whereby they would sell these engines and they would receive royalties on them. Now, this wasn't even a loan. This was an equity investment into it, whereby the royalties received on it would basically be accruing to the province, and as such, we would basically perhaps I'm not sure what the projections were in the numbers that they would produce of this type of engine, but apparently what would happen is that the royalties would be significant, and as such the province would be making money. Well, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Chairman, as much as that company perhaps had good intentions getting into it, the fact of the matter is that they produce almost none of these engines, and the employment levels that were anticipated didn't occur. Now, they're still there, and we hope that they'll do well. The fact of the matter is, at the same time, though, that is not a performance-based type of incentive that we have tried to move towards. Now, one of the reasons is that we still have many of these types of loans in our books that are being carried forward. The loan portfolio of the province is not insignificant, and there are many loans that we've dealt with that we inherited. There was one from a member from Richmond's in his riding, Rainbow Trout, I think it was, Scotia Rainbow, that was in that riding that we inherited, that caused a loss of the taxpayers of a considerable amount of money. And $4 million, I'm getting a wealth of information to my right here by the former Minister of Economic Development. But at the same time, as we move towards that, we believe that our provision for doubtful accounts will continue to drop. Now, the fact of the matter is the member opposite is quoting from a meeting that took place apparently at Treasury Board. I wasn't in attendance at the meeting, Mr. Chairman, but we've asked departments to prepare reasonable amounts for the provisions, and we provided for them. In the past, the member can probably state, now will agree that we've exceeded that in the past. Our intention this year is to live within that, and we're hopeful that will occur.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on that subject, of course, the minister's answer was nowhere close to my question, but that's okay. I'm getting used to that, Mr. Chairman. The minister says, well, it's all going to change now because the government has moved to a payroll rebate system. The problem is that Nova Scotia Business Incorporated in this year's business plan says that they want to move away from that because it provides limited benefits, that it's only certain kinds of industry that benefit from payroll rebates and other kinds of industry want other kind of benefits. And so precisely at the time when the government's trumpeting the virtues of its move to payroll rebating, their lead agency in this is saying, gee, we think we need a change of mandate because this isn't working. So that's something to look at in the future. The weekend before last, Mr. Chairman, I sat in the living room of a young man with a young family in my constituency, and we talked about all kinds of things. But what he focused on when we talked about what's standing in the way of the success of his small business, the one that he started, was the underground economy. And I looked back through newspaper clippings for the last time that this issue was mentioned by the government in any kind of formal government study. And the first item that we could find was from August 1998, nearly 5 years ago. And even that was a report that Canadian Press had gotten through the Freedom of Information Act, and it was, in the words of Canadian Press, heavily censored. Now, this young man is running his own company. He started the company with the severance money he got when he was laid off from the public sector. And it's a service industry where he's providing a service to householders. And he said the problem is what's killing his business is the underground economy. People who are willing to do the work for cash. They don't pay their workers' compensation. They don't pay their taxes. They have no overhead. They're just charging cash. And the rate that they can charge is about half of what he has to charge as the owner of a legitimate business. Now, he says if there was a level playing field, he could hire more people. And as this government likes to say, as all governments like to say, small business is the engine of growth for our economy. But the problem is that very few governments actually take concrete steps to act on that conviction. So I'd like to ask the minister, what is the latest estimate that this government has of the extent of the underground economy and the amount of tax revenue that we are losing as a result of the underground economy?
Thank you, member, for that question, and I'll pass that question to the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite brings up a good point, and he is not alone in having people approach him about this issue. I'm sure all of us as elected members are approached by people who are working very diligently to try to bring about a successful business whereby they do all that's required of them by government, and at the same time are providing employment and do also make a living at it. So the situation is one that there is an underground economy in Nova Scotia. I don't think we're different than other provinces. The question that I have, I guess, in a sense, is how we're going to approach it. We have today, Mr. Chairman, an agreement with CCRA, and that's Canada Customs Revenue Agency, which is took place of Revenue Canada. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's the Minister from New Brunswick. What's her name? That's the Chairman. Anyway, I believe it's the Minister is from New Brunswick. I can't, my mind, it slipped the top of my mind for a second there. I apologize for that. Claudia Bradshaw? Anyway, my staff should know the answer to this, and they don't. So on this issue, they have a contract with us whereby that they are our agent in monitoring the so-called underground economy. And one of the questions that we have regular discussions with them. The member opposite is saying whether or not we make public utterances on this, and I'll be honest that I haven't made public utterances in regards of the underground economy. Members' research is saying that whether or not we have done so, the answer to that is no. It doesn't mean that we're not concerned about it. We've had discussions. I've had even discussions on a personal level with the minister last time she was in my office along the lines of making sure that people can compete. I think people want to be treated fair. If they're paying taxes and they're doing their dues, and other people should also. So as to what the extent of the underground economy is, that is a difficult thing to quantify. We do know that there is one, and that is not something that is new in that sense. You look especially in the metropolitan area at this time, there is a huge increase especially in residential construction. And when that happens, there's probably even difficulty sometimes in finding people, let alone finding people who are properly registered. So there is some opportunity for that to occur. Our intention is to keep working with CCRA to keep it down to a minimum. And I think the fact of the matter is, it's like I think oftentimes if they are successful in prosecuting some cases, then I think it'll be a detriment. It'll slow down the occurrences. It's the same thing as when people speed. You don't catch every speeder, but if you catch a few of them, the other ones start thinking twice about it. Hopefully, it won't be the member opposite or I caught speeding. So,
thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
I'd like to thank the minister for his expressions of concern, and I asked 2 questions, and he didn't answer either one of them. So I'm going to give him a chance again, Mr. Chairman. In October 1997, the Department of Finance, the Nova Scotia Department of Finance, estimated the extent of underground economic activity in residential construction alone at $110 million. And what drives people crazy, the legitimate operators here, is that they're being competed against by people who aren't paying by the rules, and they're paying their fair of taxes and the other people are not. And we are losing tax revenue because we do not and will not take decisive steps to deal with the underground economy. That's the problem. This is a revenue generator, and it will help the legitimate business operators who do pay their fair share to grow and employ more Nova Scotians. So in October 1997, the department's own figures had underground economic activity in residential construction alone at $110 million. So my first question, and I'm looking for a direct answer here, and if the minister doesn't know, then maybe he can just stand up and say he doesn't know and then sit down again. Okay, I'm getting tired of the 2 or 3 minute answers where the minister is essentially saying he doesn't know. Okay, so my question is, what is the most recent estimate the Department of Finance has about the extent of underground economic activity in Nova Scotia?
Thank you, member, for the question. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite may not like my answers, and they may say they're too long. But Mr. Speaker, I have the right to answer the questions within the time limits that I'm given. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not sitting here giving 20-minute answers to short questions. And the fact of the matter is, as I indicated before, that CCRA has a contract to collect revenues for us, and the member opposite should be very much aware that HST, which is a combination both of provincial sales tax and also GST, Mr. Chairman, is brought about a new relationship between the province and the federal government that was in the past done by both entities separately. So the fact of the matter is that back in the middle 1990s, the province, perhaps because of the fact that we collected provincial sales tax at that time, would probably be in a better position to know, I guess in a sense, what levels of the economy may be going underground than we are today. I indicated to the member opposite, if he would have listened, Mr. Chairman, is that the HST is now applied by CCRA. They are the ones collecting it, Mr. Chairman, and as such, they have the jurisdiction to collect that. And to be perfectly candid, I am not permitted to ask information about any client. They will not forward that to me. It is they are the collector of it, and they do so under contract with the province. So, Mr. Chairman, since that time, Are we still concerned about the underground economy? Of course we are. But I'm also very pleased with how we're doing with our own source revenues. And when we talk about that, Mr. Chairman, is that you want to look at how our revenues have grown over the last, I would say, the last 4 or 5 years. There's been huge increases in personal income taxes. There's been huge increases in corporate income taxes. There's been huge increases even in HST, and it goes on and on. So our economy is doing better. And could we always make sure that we collect every penny? I would like to, because I would like for everything to be fair and even across the board. And if people owe taxes, they should pay it. I pay mine, and other people in this province do so also. And so the fact of the matter is, we're going to prepare to work with CCRA to see that continues. But they have the contract to administer that. And the fact is that we don't have at our disposal, because of this new agreement, all the information that we had in the past when we collected provincial sales tax directly as a province.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what I am hearing the minister saying. Is he saying the province is helpless because of this tax harmonization agreement, that they handed over the tax collection to the federal government, therefore they can't do anything, they can't ask any questions, that CCRA's got all the information, and we just don't ask the questions anymore, and that we can't raise issues, we can't ask if we're getting our fair share anymore? Because there's nothing that drives people more crazy than the idea that they're paying their fair share of taxes and the guy next door isn't. People will pay their taxes if they're convinced that everybody's paying their fair share. And one, but only one, of the major reasons why people don't believe that the guy next door is paying his fair share of taxes is the underground economy. And I'm not encouraged, and I know my constituents won't be, when they hear their Minister of Finance sort of verbally shrug his shoulders and say, well, what do you expect us to do? The federal government's looking after it. So I asked the minister for a figure, and I don't hear one, so I'm going to assume the minister doesn't know, because I'm sure if there was a figure that he'd tell us what it is. My second question, which the minister didn't answer in a previous question, was whatever the extent of the underground economy, what specific steps is the province taking to deal with it? What is it doing to kill the underground economy so that legitimate business operators, like my constituent that I was talking to weekend before last, can make an honest living for himself and his family?
Thank you, member. I'll direct that question to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Chairman, I've indicated to the member opposite, so I'll repeat it one more time so that he's aware of it, is that under the agreement that we have with CCRA, Canada Customs Revenue Agency, they are the agency that has the responsibility of collecting both the HST, which is both PST and GST combined, and also income tax. And I've mentioned before that we have met with the minister in the past, and we've brought up the issues of the underground economy, and we've asked them to put resources in the sectors where we feel that we receive the complaints. And when we do receive complaints, Mr. Chairman, we refer the matter onto the federal government, as would be prudent by any government, to make sure that they're aware of it. But I want to point out on this matter that, as sometimes even as Minister of Finance, I'm frustrated when someone has a problem, whether or not it is an income tax or also in HST, that if I ask a question in regards of it, and it may not be a very intrusive question, that we are under the contract, that information is confidential and privileged by the federal government, and even though they are collecting revenues for our province, which I have the responsibility for, I am not in a position to receive information from them other than broad policy initiatives that they would take in order to correct it. I will point out, Mr. Chairman, that one of the areas that we have made some investments in trying to deal with this is in my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, whereby we have brought in additional staff even in this year to try to deal with the underground economy that exists within that industry. And the fact of the matter is that it's also an industry whereby there are problems, and this is not unheard of. Many of us, just reading the newspaper, will pick up some of the cases that are there. Our intention is to continue to ask the federal government to give the resources in the areas where they are required. And like I said, once a year we meet with the minister, but I will point out that our staff, especially and economic and fiscal planning are bringing up issues on a more constant basis with the staff, not at the ministerial level, but at the bureaucratic level, to try to make sure that they respond in time.
Thank you, Minister, for that. The member has 3 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it is very important that people in Nova Scotia be convinced that everybody's paying their fair share. There is another issue I'd like to raise with the Minister. In the last Auditor General's report in the province of Ontario, the Auditor General identified an issue with the filing of corporate tax returns. The Auditor General pointed out that there were 763,000 Ontario registered companies, of which only 355,000, or less than half, had filed a corporate tax return in the previous year. And as a result of seeing these figures, we looked into the situation in Nova Scotia. And although, of course, we don't have the same access to information that the Provincial Department of Finance does, we were able to ascertain that there are several thousand at least, and I say at least, adopting the most, if I might excuse the expression, the most conservative way of counting, Mr. Chairman. There are several thousand at least Nova Scotia registered companies that are not filing their corporate income tax returns, and there appears to be no follow-up from the provincial government. So my question to the Minister is, do we have the same problem that Ontario has, and if we do, what is the Department of Finance doing about it?
Thank you, member, for your question. I'll turn that question over to the Minister of Finance. You have a minute and a half.
Mr. Speaker, I can't speak in regards of the situation in Ontario, and I don't think the member opposite is asking me to do so. I will point out that by talking to staff prior to arising to answer the question, that we're not aware of this being a problem in Nova Scotia. However, CCRA is the agency that deals with regards to corporations who are filing corporate income taxes here in Nova Scotia. I should point out that there are many that say that the corporate sector doesn't pay its fair share, and I know the member's party is one that keeps saying that corporations should pay more, and that basically it's, oftentimes you've been accused of being anti-business, and I'm not telling you anything here that you haven't heard. Some of it probably has come from this side of the House, but then again, you probably have enough critics all over the map that you don't have to just depend on us to be able to say that. But I want to say that in Nova Scotia, that our growth in corporate income taxes over the last few years has been significant. In this fiscal year, Mr. Chairman,